Speaking in the context of sexual violence and consent, again, these are any use of sexual actions or words that are unwanted or could be considered harmful to another person. Anytime a weapon is used to gain power and control over someone else, there's no consent. Any sexual behavior which is forced, tricked, or coerced, they're not giving consent. Being tricked into consent is a very devastating thing, especially if the person didn't want to participate. So, not being attorney, but we can read the state statutes. So, if there is force, which is a threat to inflict or bodily harm, coercion, words or circumstances that cause a person to fear that the other person will inflict bodily harm or confine the person, we often look at physical size or strength. A victim may experience circumstances that feel coercive but may not arise to criminal coercion. Examples include peer pressure, threats to being out gay, lesbian, trans, threats, starts rumors, badgering, or bribing. While circumstances may preclude a criminal charge, the sense of a violation to a victim is definitely real. So what they're experiencing is real. Just an example, if you don't have sex with me, I'll break up with you. Or if you don't have sex with me, I'll tell everybody that we did anyways. So the Minnesota state statute also looks at whether the person is mentally incapacitated. So if they're under influence of drugs or alcohol which were given without the victim's agreement. Physical helplessness, they were asleep, unconscious, too drunk to withhold consent, unable to communicate that consent, or otherwise should have known in these circumstances that this person could not get sex. So defining consent, Minnesota state statute defines it as words or offered actions by a person indicating a freely given present agreement to perform a particular sexual act with the actor. So what does this mean? This is a behavior that clearly shows the person agrees to perform a sexual act at the time it's performed. Just because a person didn't say no does not mean it should be assumed that they want to do that sexual act. If I consent to a sexual act right now, but I change my mind in 5 minutes, I am withdrawing that consent. So, defining consent, we have voluntary, free of risk, knowledge of full scope, process, respecting boundaries, understanding what a partner is feeling. So, consent is 100% voluntary. There should be no pressure to say yes, and no risk if consent is not given. Each person has knowledge of full scope of what is happening or what is going to happen throughout the sexual act. Each step of sexual activity needs to include consent. So, for example, if a person consents to kissing, if you're moving forward into touching each other's body parts, that consent should be asked and the consent should be received. If it's not, you're not moving forward. If you're going from there into intercourse, consent is needed. And any other step after. Consent does not mean being in a relationship or a prior relationship. Just because you're in a relationship, just because you may have had sexual intercourse in that relationship and you guys are not broke up, does not mean a person has a right to go and have sex with another person without their consent. Failing to resist, freeze, fight, and flight. Some people freeze. They don't know what to do in that situation. That's their body's reaction to it. That does not mean consent is given. And then giving in to peer pressure.
If you're still struggling with consent, Just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please. That's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
So, some of the assumptions that we believe here, perpetrators alone are responsible for the sexual violence they have performed on another person. Victims are not to blame for sexual violence, and sexual violence is a political and social issue, not an individual issue. Um, I mean, you see it in the news, you see it talked about all over the place, so this is just not just a support within reach issue.